Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Paul, during the height of the Cold War, Ronald Reagan sought to bankrupt the Soviet Union by forcing them into a race to build a space-based shield against nuclear missiles. Now, 40 years later, it appears that the shoe is on the other foot, as China has taken Trump's idea of a golden dome and is already in the process of building its own version.
Yeah, absolutely. And this always comes back to the fact that historically, in recent years, there's always been this belief in the West that somehow, China was militarily even inferior to to Russia, who they, completely and utterly miscalculated what that meant as well in terms of Russia's capabilities with hypersonics, etc. But in recent years, and I would say in the last 5 years or so, China just keeps coming along with new military technology that has, particularly the United States, scratching their heads, not understanding why China's just constantly moving ahead. We're almost like a metronome where everything the United States does faces endless delays. And previously, of course, this applies to hypersonic missiles, which is ongoing. Of course, China has sixth generation fighter jets. It has far more advanced laser technology than the United States has, and also to do with electromagnetic weapons as well, including, of course, electronic warfare uh, weapons that are being deployed. So, in essence, they continue to make progress, whereas the United States makes no progress. The US comes out with all these amazing ideas about what it's going to do, and then reality kicks in, nothing happens, and then in stark contrast, then the United States uh, just sits there and goes and talks big numbers and delivers nothing. And then China just gets on for a fraction of the cost and delivers on everything ahead of time. And this is another one of those examples, if we recall, where the United States talked about this like $175 billion golden dome, which was going to be this all encompassing lead missile defense umbrella that would protect the United States. And, it would have all these space based sensors and ground installations all over the United States. I mean, the question that everyone should have asked is what exactly is the United States protecting itself against? Because it's not as though anybody in the Americas is going to launch an attack on the United States. Does anyone seriously believe the Russians and the Chinese are going to do so? Absolutely not, because it's World War III again, and no one wants World War III. So, in essence, what happens is just an excuse for the military industrial complex to be beneficiaries of obscene amounts of money for producing technology, which, let's face it, the Ukraine war has proved the United States game changers are being total failures. So the United States is still huffing and puffing with regards to this golden dome. And they've got, of course, the usual technological issues, the whole budget issue, because who's going to pay for this? I mean, the United States is bankrupt. The United States has no money. It's running massive budget deficits. Well, who's going to pay for the 175 billion? Because certainly isn't going to be the Chinese or the Russians, and they don't have any architecture in place, and they don't even have any plans, and certainly no prototypes. And meanwhile, the Chinese never really announced something that you would call comparable and arguably better than this idea of Golden Dome was actually even in place. And then all of a sudden, they now have a prototype that's already been deployed by the Chinese military, the PLA, basically. And this is again symptomatic of where China just gets on with things, doesn't talk about how much it costs, doesn't talk about these fantastical ideas of military supremacy. It just gets on and creates new missile technology, or in this case, missile defense systems, and they work, they're efficient, they're very cost effective. And that's how China operates, whereas the United States just blows hot air, talks a great story, and ends up, frankly, delivering absolutely nothing.
I think it's important to take a look at what China has done when it comes to here's a problem, let's focus on a solution. Back during the time when China did the Olympics, one of the biggest things that was a problem was the pollution. And within a short amount of time after the Olympics were over, they focused and dedicated to clearing out the pollution. One of the big things was, hey, here's this opportunity to remove, say, gasoline-based cars and bring about EVs. At the same time, while the West was talking about EVs and giving all these subsidies and that, and trying and not building the infrastructure, China said, "Here we have done this, the study, the research. Here's the solution." They went full bore. It's the same thing with quote unquote climate change. The West has talked about it and they've made all these threats and all these apocalyptic, scare tactics. And China just said, okay, that's a really good solution. We're going to build the biggest array of solar panels in the world. And they've already done it. The same thing can be said, of course, with the chips, where the West is making the threat of we're going to keep you from buying the higher technology. Okay, we'll just build our own. And in a short amount of time, they've either are just under, equal to, or are about to surpass anything the West has. And then finally, take a look at AI. The West is about to put trillions of dollars into it, or at least allegedly, from all the uh, declarations. And within a short amount of time, for $6 million, they came out with DeepSeek. So this is one of the biggest things that you find with China versus the West as a whole, is there's always these hyperbolic statements and saying, we're going to do this. And in the end, they either never do it or it takes decades to do it. And by then, the technology is already antiquated. While China says, okay, can we do this within a 5-year plan? How is this going to benefit? And boom. And you take a look, and not only has it benefited, but it's also taken China, when you take a look at their cities and the technology and the infrastructure, they are decades now ahead of anything that the United States or Europe has. And so when it comes to something like this, they look at the technology they already have. They look at the problem before them. Okay, while nuclear war is a low level threat, what can we do to make that and decrease that probability even more? Well, they created their own GPS system. They focused on hypersonics. They now have many of the components already in place that they just have to build them around an umbrella of what would be the equivalent of a golden dome. And I bet they probably get this accomplished within 2 to 5 years at the most.
Well, the fact is, they've got a working prototype. When China says they've got a working prototype, that means the system works. I mean, okay, rolling it out across the entire country, obviously will take some time, but China doesn't hang around. So who knows? It could be far quicker than that. I mean, but the West, it would take 20 years to do it. But they said, we've got this working prototype of this global defense system that can monitor missiles launched from anywhere in the world. It's called Distributed Early Warning Detection Big Data Platform. and it can track up to 1,000 incoming missiles simultaneously. And it gets data from satellite, radar, optical sensors, and of course, also reconnaissance data from land, sea, air, and space. So it basically is what the what this golden dome is supposed to achieve. So obviously, the technology can identify flight paths, but it also distinguishes between real warheads and decoys. And it can obviously, therefore, provide significant information and guides intercept systems. So this deals with long-standing issues where you have to combine data from different sources, that it's able to integrate that information and utilize it in an effective manner. And if you can get a platform that unifies identification, launch alerts tracking or target tracking, and you can share that across command levels, that gives the Chinese a massive advantage in dealing with problematic situations like that. I mean, that's a bit of a trivial statement, but people understand what that means. I mean, and also the data can be collected, and because it's such an enormous amount of data, they said it can then be used to train AI systems for future upgrades. Now, in comparison, what has the United States done with this Golden Dome project? Yeah, they talked about creating this back in May, but there's no evidence of any progress being made. And apparently, the lead of this program, who's in the US's Space Force, said, progress is slow. I mean, he said, everyone who's telling you they think they know do not know, including me. And that was stated back in July. So, as usual, there are huge challenges that face the United States. Anything technological these days, they're lagging uh, seriously in terms of design and then subsequent implementation, testing, etc. And I'm not saying the United States won't eventually get this right, but as Ken rightly points out, this could be something that by the time they get this out, China's already 2 or 3 iterations ahead in terms of perfecting, honing, and refining this technology. But if it's already there for this Chinese prototype, basically they've built the world's first planet-wide missile defense system. And yes, they're going to improve in it. They're going to tinker with it. They're going to scale up the platform so for future adoption. But the point is, if you can get it working in a prototype sense, then scalability is not really the problem. I'm not saying I'm not trivializing it, but China's well on the way to having this system in place. And I would suspect, as Ken said, if you say 2 to 5 years, I think it's going to be nearer the 2 years, and who knows, maybe even quicker. Because what China tends to do, unlike the US, who talks about things as though they've already delivered on it when they've not done anything, China tends to say, this is a prototype when it's fully operational, or this is in the development phase when they have a prototype. They're always an iteration or two ahead of what they're doing, and that's for deliberate reasons, obviously. They want to give the impression that something isn't as advanced in terms of its utilization and adoption than obviously it is in reality. And I would suspect that is probably the case because at the end of the day, why has this come out? Why is this? I wouldn't call it leaked, it's the wrong word. But in essence, this delivers a really crushing blow to the US's own aspirations. Because there's no doubt the United States would have said, we've created this, it's impregnable. But anyone could say it's impregnable because it's never going to be tested. Who is going to go, I think I'm going to attack the United States with 500 missiles? Nobody's going to. So it doesn't matter whether it works or not. I mean, someone's going to pay huge sums of money to the military industrial complex for a solution that's never going to be tested in anger. So it's a great way of just making, excuse me, huge amounts of money. That's the difference. China doesn't have a military industrial complex that's there to rip off the US or European taxpayers. It does its job for what it needs, and they don't spend a penny more than they need to because they don't have that problem in their country, which unfortunately we do in the West.
Yeah, and I just can't help but when you take a look at how the United States is today, or Europe, and I don't even think Europe even considered trying to do this on any type of scale, but the U.S. is in the government shutdown. They're completely bankrupt. And when you take a look at the last several pieces of technology that they've tried to create, the F-35 and all its problems, the stealth ship that is just a farce unto itself, and then of course when you take a look at their promises of we're gonna dominate and control space, and really when they have their meetings, you hear the chief of Space Command whining about how China is so far ahead of them, and they've got to try to compete. That's to me the biggest problem is they don't have the technological wherewithal anymore. They don't have the funds to do it, and even if they do, they overpay for everything so much for less quality and capability that it's like what Reagan tried to do. He used SDI as a means that he knew it wasn't going to come into fruition, but they were able to push it to scare the Soviets into putting money into a quote unquote space race that was going to bankrupt them. And it was one of the key things that helped bring about the end of the Soviet Union. So, U.S. is going to have a choice. If China implements this fully, then Trump in his ego is going to either have to dedicate, almost like Kennedy did for taking a man to the moon. He's going to have to dedicate a lot of resources to equating this or surpassing it, which case the U.S. is going to get more into financial ruin, or he's just going to give it up and say, "Oh well, it wasn't really important anyway, and it's not a big deal." I suspect it's going to be the second because you have to take a look at all the promises that have been made in his administration so far this year, and some of them have come through, but the majority of them have not.
Yeah, absolutely, and I would agree that it's probably the latter because if it costs 175 billion, it will already be costing 350 billion. And if it ever got rolled out, it'll be a trillion because everything in the United States runs massively over budget, takes way longer than it's supposed to, because they're just incapable of planning things correctly. And frankly, now going into too much detail, I've had very similar experiences with running into those kind of problems with massive over spending, hopeless, hopelessly blown budgets in the US, etc., etc. And all of this is just very symptomatic of how the US is never efficient in anything it does. And really, this is as much as anything trying to regain some ground with respect to its lack of credibility because of all the game changers it sent to Ukraine that were useless. And Russia just destroyed them all. I mean, look at the Abrams tanks. No one even talks about that anymore. It's like acute embarrassment because Russia destroyed them all. And they didn't achieve any objectives whatsoever. So, this is the US trying to regain some credibility, but no one's believing it anymore. I mean, seeing's believing. If the US actually delivers something that does the job it's supposed to be, then people will go, okay, fair enough. But aside from that, no one believes the hot air or the rhetoric, and the space race stuff's quite hilarious when they kind of went, well, we don't have the capability to do what we did in 1969. I mean, what? What? I mean, anyway, we're not getting into that story, but the point is that the United States has gone backwards so much technologically, and And China just keeps rubbing their nose in it by delivering in a very understated, matter of fact way. And it's the end of the day, that's what counts in the world, delivering or over delivering on what you say you're going to do at a cheaper cost and doing it far more quickly and efficiently. That's what the world's about now, and not all this bloated kind of rhetoric that promises to deliver something it never delivers and costs obscene amounts of money. Nobody now sees huge inflated figures as some kind of justification for a project, or, well, this must be a really, state of the art project if it costs that much. The world just laughs at this and goes, oh, look, there's the US blowing enormous sums of money on nothing once again.
Indeed, and you never know with something, that obviously this is built in for a larger scale, a more macro thing, i.e., nuclear missiles or hypersonics or anything that may come into within the dome. But over time, that's going to be able to scale down even smaller and smaller. So they'll be able to detect drones. They'll be able to detect anything that might potentially become a detriment in either war, surveillance, or the like. And because they are being part of a much more multilateral world, then allies may have the eventually have the access to have this as they're protecting their own countries. Paul, were
Yeah.
there any other final thoughts you wanted to add to this?
No, I think that's fine.
To everybody here at the Sirius Report community, as always, thank you for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.